The crimson sky of Zirian Prime burned like a dying star as explosions rocked the Crystal Palace. Marcus Chun pressed himself against the translucent wall, his rifle ready, watching the chaos unfold through the shimmering barrier. The Zephyrian Royal Guard, those proud warriors who had sworn eternal loyalty to their queen, were fleeing like cowards through the gardens below. Retreat. All units fall back to the ships. The voice of Commander Zviexthul crackled through the palace's communication system. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. These alien soldiers, standing nearly 8 feet tall with their crystalline armor and energy weapons, were abandoning their post. Marcus had been on Zirian Prime for 6 months as part of the Terran Zephyrian Cultural Exchange Program. Earth had only recently made contact with the Zephyrian Empire, and humans were still considered primitive by most alien species in this sector of the galaxy. He was supposed to be observing their military protocols, learning from their advanced technology, and centuries of warfare experience. Now he watched those same warriors scatter like leaves in a storm. The palace shook again. Through the crystal walls, Marcus could see the approaching enemy forces. The Vorthak Collective had finally made their move against the Zephyrian Empire. Their black ships descended from the burning sky like harbingers of death, disgorging waves of insectoid warriors onto the palace grounds. The Vorthaks were known throughout the galaxy as merciless conquerors who showed no quarter to those they defeated. "Human soldier," a melodious voice called out behind him. Marcus spun around to see Queen Lyralii herself standing in the doorway of the throne room. She was magnificent even in her fear, her pale blue skin shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with her emotions. Her silver hair flowed like liquid metal down her back, and her large, violet eyes held a mixture of desperation and dignity. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, dropping to one knee as he had been taught. "Where are your guards?" "Gone," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal. "They received word that the collective has brought planet killers. Rather than die with honor defending their queen, they chose to flee and preserve their own lives." Marcus felt anger rise in his chest. On Earth, soldiers who abandoned their posts in the face of danger were considered the lowest form of coward. But these weren't human soldiers. They were Zephyrians, supposedly the most honorable warriors in the known galaxy. "What are your orders, Your Majesty?" Queen Lyralii looked surprised. "Orders? Human, you are not bound by oath to protect me. Your people have no formal alliance with mine. You should flee with the others while you still can." Marcus stood up, adjusting his grip on his rifle. "With respect, Your Majesty, I didn't take an oath to you, but I took an oath to something bigger than myself. Where I come from, we don't abandon people who need help, regardless of what species they are." The Queen's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated surprise and curiosity. "Your people are unusual. Most species value self-preservation above all else. Humans are stubborn that way," Marcus said with a grim smile. "What's the situation? Is there a secure location in the palace where you can wait this out?" "The royal bunker is 3 levels down, but the access routes are likely compromised. The Vorthaks have been planning this assault for months. They know our defensive positions better than we do ourselves." Another explosion, closer this time. Through the crystal walls, Marcus could see Vorthak shock troopers advancing through the gardens, their mandibles clicking in their alien language. They moved with the coordination of a hive mind, their black carapaces gleaming wetly in the light of the burning sky. "How many of them are out there?" Marcus asked. "Sensors indicate approximately 2,000 ground forces with air support. A full invasion force." Marcus did quick calculations in his head. He had 30 rounds as current magazine, plus 4 spare magazines. That was 150 rounds total. He also carried a sidearm with 3 magazines, adding another 45 rounds. His combat knife would be useful in close quarters. Against 2,000 enemies, it wasn't much, but it would have to do. "Your Majesty, I need you to understand something. I'm just one human with limited ammunition and no support. I can't promise to save you, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you alive as long as possible. Queen Lyralii studied him with those large violet eyes. In them, Marcus saw something he recognized from his own species, the will to survive, but also something more. Dignity, honor, the resolve to face death standing up rather than cowering. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Stay close, follow my orders without question, and trust me. I may be primitive by your standards, but humans have been fighting impossible odds for our entire existence. It's what we do." The queen nodded. "I place myself under your protection, Marcus Chun of Earth." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had volunteered for this exchange program to learn about alien cultures and advanced technology. He never expected to become the last line of defense for royalty. But life had a way of putting you exactly where you needed to be, whether you felt ready or not. "All right, Your Majesty. First thing we need to do is get out of this throne room. It's too exposed, and they'll head straight here once they breach the palace. Is there a more defensible position nearby?" "The archive chamber," she said immediately. "It's smaller, with only 2 entrances, both easily defended. The walls are reinforced duranium, designed to protect our historical records." "Perfect. Lead the way, but stay behind me." Marcus checked his rifle one more time as they moved through the crystal corridors of the palace. The architecture was breathtakingly beautiful, all flowing curves and prismatic surfaces that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. It was also completely impractical from a defensive standpoint. Too many sight lines, too many approaches, too many places for enemies to hide. They had just reached a junction in the corridor when the first Vorthack shock trooper came around the corner. The creature stood nearly 7 feet tall, its black carapace covered in razor-sharp spines, its compound eyes fixed on them immediately, and its mandibles spread wide in what Marcus assumed was either a war cry or a feeding display. Marcus didn't hesitate. 3 quick shots at center mass dropped the creature before it could raise its weapon. The sound of gunfire echoed through the crystal halls like thunder. "This way," Queen Lyralii pointed down a side corridor. "Quickly, before more arrive." They ran through the twisting passages of the palace as the sounds of battle grew closer. Marcus could hear the distinctive whine of Vorthack energy weapons and the crash of breaking crystal as the invaders smashed their way through the beautiful architecture. The archive chamber was exactly as the queen had described, a smaller, more defensible space with walls of dark metal instead of crystal. Ancient Zephyrian texts and data cores lined the walls, the accumulated knowledge of millennia. Marcus quickly assessed the tactical situation. The main entrance could be covered from multiple angles, and the secondary entrance was narrow enough that enemies would have to come through single file. "Your Majesty, I need you to find the most protected corner of this room and stay there. Don't move unless I tell you to." "Understood. Understood." She moved to the far corner behind a massive data storage unit that would provide some cover for both entrances. Marcus began setting up his defense. He overturned heavy reading tables to create makeshift barriers and positioned himself where he could cover both entrances. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. The first wave hit 5 minutes later. 3 Vorthacks burst through the main entrance, their energy weapons charging with an ominous hum. Marcus was ready for them. His first shot caught the lead creature in what he hoped was its center of mass. The round punched through its carapace with a wet crack, and the alien went down hard. The second Vorthack got off a shot that seared the air inches from Marcus's head before his return fire found its mark. The third creature managed to dive behind cover, but Marcus kept it pinned down with sustained fire until it tried to flank him. A well-placed shot ended its flanking maneuver permanently. "Impressive," Queen Lyralii called out from her corner. "Your weapons are primitive, but your marksmanship is exceptional." "Thanks," Marcus replied, reloading quickly. "But this is just the beginning. They're going to keep coming until they overwhelm us with numbers." He was right. The next wave consisted of 6 Vorthacks, and they came prepared. They had obviously learned from the fate of their predecessors and approached more cautiously using covering fire and tactical movement. Marcus found himself in the fight of his life. These creatures were smart, coordinated, and utterly ruthless. They used their natural agility to bound from cover to cover, their energy weapons laying down, suppressing fire while their comrades advanced. But Marcus had advantages too. He was fighting in an enclosed space where superior numbers couldn't be brought to bear effectively. He knew every inch of the room's layout, every piece of cover, and he had something the Vortex didn't expect, the desperate cunning of a human being fighting for something he believed in. When two Vortex tried to rush his position simultaneously, Marcus rolled behind his makeshift barricade and came up with his combat knife in hand. The first alien's mandible snapped at his throat, but Marcus ducked under the attack and drove his blade up into what he hoped was a vital area. The creature's shriek confirmed his guess. The second Vortex swung its weapon like a club, trying to crush Marcus's skull. He caught the blow on his rifle, the impact nearly breaking his arms, but managed to bring his sidearm up and put 3 rounds into the creature's compound eyes. The remaining Vortex hesitated, clearly not expecting such fierce resistance from a primitive human. Marcus used their momentary confusion to his advantage, dropping 2 more with precisely placed shots. The archive chamber fell silent, except for the distant sounds of battle elsewhere in the palace. Marcus quickly checked his ammunition. 23 rounds left in his rifle, plus his sidearm magazines. Not good, but he was still in the fight. "Your Majesty, are you injured?" "No," came her voice from behind the data storage unit. "But you are." Marcus looked down and realized she was right. A Vortex energy blast had grazed his left arm, leaving a painful burn through his uniform. He hadn't even noticed it during the fighting. "It's not serious," he said, though the wound throbbed with each heartbeat. "How long before more arrive?" "Soon," the Queen replied. "They will not give up easily. My people, my former people, believed the Vortex could be reasoned with, negotiated with. They were wrong. The collective sees any species that isn't them as resources to be harvested." Marcus nodded grimly. He had studied the Vortex collective during his time on Zirian Prime. They were an expanding hive-mind civilization that conquered worlds not for territory or resources in the traditional sense, but to incorporate the genetic material and knowledge of other species into their collective consciousness. They saw individual sentient beings the way humans might see particularly interesting bacteria. "Your Majesty, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Ask." "Is there any way off this planet that doesn't involve going through 2,000 Vortex?" There was a long pause before she answered. "No. The orbital platforms are under their control. The spaceport is overrun. Even if we could somehow reach my personal transport, the collective ships would destroy us before we reach the edge of the atmosphere. So we're trapped here." "Yes." Marcus absorbed this information without despair. He had been in hopeless situations before, though admittedly none quite this hopeless. But despair was a luxury he couldn't afford. As long as he was still breathing, still fighting, there was always a chance. "Then we make them pay for every inch of ground they take," he said simply. The Queen's bioluminescent patterns shifted again, this time to what Marcus had learned indicated deep respect. "You truly are an unusual species. Any rational being would attempt to surrender and hope for mercy." "Mercy isn't something you hope for," Marcus replied, checking his weapon again. "It's something you earn, and the only way to earn it from creatures like the Vortex is to make the cost of killing you too high to be worth paying." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors outside. Many footsteps. The next wave was coming, and it sounded like they were bringing friends. Marcus took a deep breath and settled into his firing position. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought about Earth, about his family, about all the things he would never see again. But mostly he thought about the alien queen, counting on him to keep her alive just a little bit longer. The footsteps grew closer. Through the doorway, Marcus could see the distinctive silhouettes of Vortex-shocked troopers moving with purpose through the crystal corridors. They had learned from their previous encounters, and we're approaching more methodically this time. Your Majesty, Marcus called out softly, whatever happens in the next few minutes, don't watch. And if they get past me, don't let them take you alive. I understand, came her quiet reply. Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment, centering himself the way his instructors had taught him back on Earth. When he opened them again, he was no longer Marcus Chun, the cultural exchange observer. He was a human warrior protecting something precious, and he would make humanity proud. The first Vorthack appeared in the doorway, and the battle for the archive chamber began in earnest. The Vorthacks came in disciplined waves, 10 at a time, their compound eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. Marcus had never faced enemies quite like these. They moved with a coordination that suggested shared consciousness, each creature anticipating the actions of its fellows with uncanny precision. The first wave tested his defenses, probing for weaknesses. Marcus made them pay dearly for their intelligence gathering. His rifle cracked repeatedly, each shot carefully aimed and precisely delivered. The ancient human art of marksmanship served him well in the confined space of the archive chamber. But the Vorthacks were learning too. Each wave came better prepared than the last, adapting to his tactics with disturbing speed. They began using their fallen comrades as cover, their carapaces apparently thick enough to stop his rounds. When Marcus adjusted by aiming for gaps in their natural armor, they started wearing additional protection over those vulnerable areas. Fascinating, Queen Lyralii observed during a brief lull between attacks. They are incorporating your tactics into their collective consciousness in real time. Each death makes the survivors more dangerous. Then, I'll have to get creative, Marcus replied, ejecting his spent magazine and loading his third. He was down to his last 2 rifle magazines now, plus his sidearm. At this rate, he would be out of ammunition within the hour. The next wave brought a new challenge. The Vorthacks had somehow acquired portable energy shields, glowing barriers that deflected his bullets harmlessly. They advanced methodically, using the shields to close distance while their rear ranks provided covering fire. Marcus waited until they were almost to his position before springing his trap. He had noticed that the energy shields created a distinctive electromagnetic signature that interfered with the archive chamber's lighting systems. The lights flickered and dimmed whenever the shields passed beneath them. Using this knowledge, Marcus had quietly repositioned several pieces of debris to create a funnel that would force the advancing Vorthacks into a specific kill zone. When they reached the predetermined point, he triggered his improvised trap. The heavy data storage unit that Queen Lyralii had been sheltering behind was mounted on an articulated support arm designed to move it around the chamber for research purposes. Marcus had spent the brief respite between attacks figuring out how to overload its control system. When he activated it, the massive unit swung like a giant club, smashing 3 shield-bearing Vorthacks against the chamber wall with bone-crushing force. The surviving aliens hesitated, their hive mind processing this unexpected tactic. Marcus used their confusion to his advantage, dropping 2 more with carefully placed shots to their weapon arms. A Vorthack with a damaged weapon was effectively neutralized in this enclosed environment. But his victory was short-lived. The next wave brought an even more disturbing development. Among the standard shock troopers was a larger, more heavily armored creature that Marcus had never seen before. Its carapace was a deeper black, almost absorbing light, and its eyes glowed with an inner fire that suggested enhanced intelligence. Harvester class, Queen Lyralii whispered from her new hiding place behind another data storage unit. They're the leaders of Vorthack assault teams. This one has probably absorbed the knowledge of hundreds of conquered species. The Harvester studied the archive chamber with obvious intelligence, its gaze taking in the tactical situation with the cold calculation of a master strategist. When it spoke, its voice was a horrible harmony of different vocal patterns, as if multiple species were speaking in unison. Human warrior, it said, the words heavily accented, but clearly understandable. Your resistance is noted and recorded. Your genetic patterns will make an excellent addition to our collective knowledge. Surrender yourself, and the failing monarch, and your death will be swift." Marcus didn't bother to reply. Instead, he put a round center mass into the creature's torso. The bullet struck the harvester's armor and ricocheted harmlessly away, leaving barely a scratch on the dense carapace. Fascinating, the harvester continued, apparently untroubled by the attack. "Your species favors kinetic projectiles over energy weapons. Primitive, yet effective against our standard troops. We will adapt." The creature raised one clawed hand, and the remaining Vorthax began their assault with new coordination. They moved in perfect synchronization, creating overlapping fields of fire while advancing on multiple vectors simultaneously. Their tactics had evolved beyond simple hive coordination into something approaching military artistry. Marcus found himself fighting for his life against enemies who were literally learning from his every action. Each shot he fired gave him new data about his capabilities. Each tactical decision he made was incorporated into their collective strategy. He was essentially training them to kill him more efficiently. "Your Majesty," he called out during a desperate reload, "does your people's technology include anything that might be useful right now?" "Anything at all. The archive chamber has a security lockdown system," she replied. "But it would trap us in here with them." "What about emergency protocols? Self-destruct? Anything." "There is one possibility," the Queen said slowly. "The archives contain dangerous information. Historical records of biological weapons, stellar engineering data that could be used to create supernovas, genetic templates for extinct species. If that knowledge fell into the wrong hands." "There's a dead man's switch," Marcus finished, understanding immediately. "Yes, but activating it would destroy not just this chamber, but this entire wing of the palace. Neither of us would survive." Marcus absorbed this information while continuing to fight. The Vorthax were pressing their advantage, forcing him to give ground. Soon they would be close enough for hand-to-hand combat, and the odds would shift decisively in their favor. "How long will we have?" he asked. "Perhaps 10 minutes between activation and detonation." Marcus did rapid calculations. 10 minutes was enough time for him to inflict significant casualties, possibly enough to disrupt their assault on other parts of the planet. It was also enough time for something unexpected to happen. In his experience, the most desperate situations often produce the most unlikely opportunities. "Your Majesty, I need you to prepare to activate that system on my signal." "Not yet, but be ready." "Understood." The harvester had been listening to their conversation, and its voice carried a note of what might have been amusement. "You would destroy yourself rather than accept assimilation? How wastefully individualistic. Your genetic material and knowledge could contribute to the betterment of countless species within our collective." "That's where you're wrong," Marcus replied, putting another round into the creature's armor with no visible effect. "My species doesn't believe in betterment through conquest. We believe in earning our place in the universe. Your species will be extinct within a generation," the harvester said with clinical certainty. "Your star system is already marked for harvesting. Your resistance here merely delays the inevitable." For the first time since the battle began, Marcus smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You obviously haven't studied humans very carefully. We have a saying on Earth: the graveyards are full of people who thought we were inevitable." The harvester's compound eyes fixed on him with new interest. "You speak as if your species has faced extinction before." "Multiple times. Ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, pandemics, asteroid impacts, world wars. Each time, someone or something thought we were finished. Each time, they were wrong." Marcus punctuated his words with another shot, this one aimed at the creature's knee joint. The bullet found a gap in the armor, and the harvester stumbled slightly. It was the first sign of vulnerability the creature had shown. "Impossible," it said, studying the wound with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Our intelligence indicated your species had never faced a truly existential threat." "Your intelligence was wrong," Marcus replied. "We're still here, aren't we?" The conversation was interrupted by a new development. Through the chamber's remaining crystal walls, Marcus could see movement in the corridors beyond. But These weren't more Vortex. These were Zephyrian soldiers, moving with desperate purpose through the palace halls. The royal guard has returned, Queen Lyralii breathed. Marcus felt a moment of hope before reality reasserted itself. Even if the guards had grown spines and come back to fight, they would be vastly outnumbered. The Vortex had had hours to establish their positions and bring up reinforcements. But then something remarkable happened. The approaching Zephyrian soldiers weren't alone. With them came figures in unfamiliar armor, moving with military precision and carrying weapons that Marcus didn't recognize. Terran colonial marines, the queen whispered in amazement. But how? Marcus understood immediately. Earth had received word of the attack and dispatched military aid. It was a risky move, potentially starting a war between humanity and the Vortex Collective, but it was exactly the kind of gesture his species was known for. Because that's what we do, he said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was answering the Queen's question or his own thoughts. The Harvester had also noticed the new arrivals, and its harmonious voice carried a note of concern for the first time. Additional forces were not anticipated. Our intelligence indicated your species was confined to a single star system. Like I said, your intelligence needs work. The battle in the corridors outside intensified as Terran Marines engaged Vortex forces with weapons that were clearly designed for this kind of warfare. Marcus could hear the distinctive crack of human firearms mixed with the whine of both Zephyrian and Vortex energy weapons. The sound of combat was moving closer to the archive chamber. Your Majesty, hold off on that dead man's switch. We might have other options now. But the Harvester wasn't finished. It raised its weapon, a crystalline construct that hummed with barely contained energy, and aimed it directly at Queen Lyralii's position. The royal genetic template will be preserved regardless of the outcome here, it stated. Marcus didn't hesitate. He threw himself between the creature and the Queen just as the energy weapon discharged. The beam caught him in the chest, and pain beyond description exploded through his body. He felt his armor ablating under the energy assault, the smell of burning synthetic materials filling his nostrils. But he remained standing. The Harvester's weapon was designed to incapacitate rather than kill, meant to preserve valuable genetic material for later harvesting. That mistake would be its last. Marcus raised his rifle with arms that felt like they were on fire and put his remaining rounds exactly where he wanted them. Not into the creature's armored torso, but into the weapon itself. The crystalline construct shattered under the impact, energy feedback causing the Harvester to stumble backward. Impossible, the creature repeated, but this time there was something approaching fear in its harmonious voice. You keep using that word, Marcus gasped, fighting to stay conscious through the pain. I don't think it means what you think it means. The archive chamber door exploded inward as Terran Marines breached the entrance. Marcus had never been happier to see the familiar angular armor and weapons of his own species' military. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, establishing fields of fire and eliminating remaining Vortex with prejudice. The Harvester realized that the tactical situation had shifted beyond recovery. It activated some kind of personal teleportation device, disappearing in a shower of sparks and leaving behind only the acrid smell of ozone. Human down, one of the Marines called out, rushing to Marcus's side. Medic, I'm okay, Marcus wheezed, though he clearly wasn't. Protect the Queen. Copy that, sir. Your Majesty, are you injured? Queen Lyralii emerged from behind the data storage unit, her bioluminescent patterns shifting through a complex sequence that Marcus had learned indicated profound gratitude mixed with disbelief. I am unharmed, she said formally, thanks to the courage of one human soldier who refused to abandon his post. The Marine medic was already working on Marcus, injecting him with something that made the pain recede to manageable levels. Sir, you've got some serious energy burns here, but nothing that won't heal. You'll be back on your feet in a few days. What's the situation outside? Marcus asked. Vortex are in full retreat, another Marine reported. Turns out they're not used to facing opponents who actually fight back. Most species either surrender immediately or get overwhelmed by their numbers. When they ran into coordinated resistance from both Terran and Zephyrian forces, their whole strategy fell apart. Marcus nodded weakly. It made sense. The Vortex had built their entire conquest strategy around overwhelming, psychologically unprepared opponents with superior numbers and coordination. They weren't equipped to handle enemies who refused to be intimidated. "How did Earth even know we needed help?" he asked. "Your cultural exchange partner back on Earth," the squad leader replied. Zephyrian named Keelthara. Soon as the attack started, she convinced our government that immediate military assistance was necessary to preserve the alliance. Diplomats are still arguing about the legal implications, but Marines don't wait for lawyers. Marcus managed a weak laugh. Keelthara had been his counterpart in the exchange program, studying human culture while he learned about Zephyrian society. She had always been fascinated by human concepts of loyalty and mutual aid. Apparently, she had understood those concepts better than anyone realized. "Sir, we need to get you to a medical facility," the medic said. "Those energy burns need proper treatment." "What about the Queen?" "Extraction team is standing by. She'll be evacuated to a secure location until the political situation stabilizes." Queen Lyralii approached Marcus's makeshift medical station, her expression grave but dignified. "Marcus Chun of Earth, you have earned the eternal gratitude of the Zephyrian people. When my guards abandoned their oaths, you upheld yours to a higher principle." "I just did what anyone would do, Your Majesty." "No," she said firmly. "You did what humans do. There is a difference, and it is a difference that will reshape how the galaxy thinks about your species." As the Marines prepared to move him to an extraction point, Marcus reflected on the events of the past few hours. He had come to Zirian Prime to learn about alien cultures and advanced technology. Instead, he had learned something about himself, about humanity, and about the value of refusing to give up even when all logic suggested surrender was the only rational choice. The Vorthack Collective had made a critical error in their assessment of both humans and their allies. They had assumed that all species would behave rationally when faced with overwhelming odds. They hadn't accounted for the possibility that some beings might choose to fight simply because it was the right thing to do. As they carried him through the crystal corridors of the palace, now scarred by battle, but still beautiful, Marcus could hear the sounds of celebration beginning to rise from the gardens outside. The attack had been repelled, the Queen was safe, and a new alliance had been forged in the fires of combat. He closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Today had been a good day to be human 3 weeks after the Battle of the Crystal Palace, as historians were already calling it. Marcus Chin found himself in an entirely different kind of uncomfortable situation. Instead of facing alien warriors with impossible odds, he was sitting in the Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Hall, wearing a dress uniform that felt more constraining than body armor, listening to politicians debate the implications of humanity's intervention on Zirian Prime. The medical treatment had been surprisingly effective. Zephyrian medical technology, enhanced by human field medicine techniques, had healed his energy burns with minimal scarring. Physically, he felt better than he had in years. Politically, he was at the center of a storm that threatened to reshape interstellar relations across the known galaxy. "The human intervention sets a dangerous precedent," declared Ambassador Vextorian of the Hegemony, his 6 arms gesticulating in patterns that Marcus was still learning to interpret. "What happens when Earth decides that other species require their particular brand of assistance?" Queen Lyralii sat in the Zephyrian delegation section, her posture formal, but her bioluminescent patterns clearly displaying her irritation with the proceedings. She had spent the past 3 weeks rebuilding her government and purging the military ranks of those who had fled during the crisis. The process had been painful, but necessary. "The Terran intervention was specifically requested," she replied coolly, "and it was limited in scope to defensive actions only. No Terran forces remained on Zephyrian soil after the immediate threat was neutralized." "That's not the point," interrupted Counselor Zekthai of the Trade Federation, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns. The point is that a minor species with no significant technological advantages somehow managed to defeat a Vorthack collective force that should have been overwhelming. Marcus suppressed the urge to point out that defeating the Vorthacks had been a joint effort. The political narrative seemed determined to focus on human involvement, probably because it was easier to understand than the complex reality of combined operations. Admiral Sarah Morrison, representing Earth's delegation, stood to address the assembly. Marcus had served under her briefly during his early career, and he knew her to be a pragmatist who cut through diplomatic doublespeak like a plasma torch through hull plating. "The real question," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "is why a supposedly advanced galactic civilization was so surprised that someone fought back against a genocidal aggressor. Where were the rest of you when the Vorthacks were systematically eliminating entire species?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus knew the answer, of course. The other major powers had been content to let the Vorthacks expand as long as they weren't directly threatened. It was the same pattern of appeasement that had allowed various Earth dictators to conquer their neighbors before finally provoking a global response. The Vorthack Collective represents a significant military threat, admitted General Tyx Cole of the Defense Alliance, his reptilian features showing obvious discomfort. Direct confrontation with them has historically resulted in massive casualties for minimal strategic gain. So you let them genocide minor species to avoid the cost of stopping them, Admiral Morrison replied bluntly. "That's a policy position, General, not a law of physics." Marcus watched the interplay of galactic politics with growing understanding. Earth's entry into interstellar affairs had disrupted carefully maintained balances of power. The major species had developed a system where smaller civilizations served as buffer states and acceptable losses in larger conflicts. Humanity's refusal to accept that paradigm was causing significant discomfort among the established powers. "If I may," Queen Lorelei interjected, "I believe we are focusing on the wrong questions. The Vorthack Collective was defeated not because of superior human technology, but because of superior human psychology. Perhaps we should examine what that tells us about ourselves." The chamber fell silent. It was one thing for humans to criticize galactic civilization. It was quite another for an established member species to do so. Counselor Zekthai's crystalline form shifted to darker hues, indicating displeasure. "Your Majesty speaks from recent trauma. Perhaps perspective will improve with time." "My perspective has indeed improved," the Queen replied. "I have seen what happens when warriors abandon their oaths for personal survival. I have also seen what happens when someone upholds principles even when those principles offer no personal advantage." Marcus felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes settling on him. He had hoped to remain a quiet observer during these proceedings, but it seemed the universe had other plans. Sergeant Chun called the presiding counselor, a being whose species Marcus couldn't identify. "You were the first human to engage Vorthack forces in direct combat. Your perspective on these events would be valuable." Marcus stood slowly, acutely aware that his next words could influence the future of humanity's place in galactic affairs. He thought about giving a diplomatic response, something safe and non-committal. Then he thought about the archive chamber and the choice between safety and principle. "Honored counselors," he began, "I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. The Vorthacks attacked an ally. We helped defend them. That's not foreign policy. That's just basic decency." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through some sections of the assembly. Other sections displayed signs of irritation or confusion. "But surely you understand the broader implications," pressed Ambassador Vextorian. "Your actions have disrupted established diplomatic protocols that have maintained stability for centuries. With respect, sir, I don't think your stability was worth the price you were paying for it." Marcus felt Admiral Morrison's approving gaze and Queen Lyraelia's gratitude, but he also sensed the growing hostility from several delegations. He was walking into politically dangerous territory, but he found he didn't care. Some truths needed to be spoken regardless of their diplomatic cost. The Vorthack Collective has conquered 17 star systems in the past 50 years, he continued. They've eliminated at least 12 sentient species that we know of. And your response has been to hope they'll be satisfied with eating your neighbors instead of you. The collective's expansion was contained within acceptable parameters, General TYX Cole protested. Acceptable to whom? Not to the species they exterminated. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, translation systems struggling to keep up with the overlapping conversations. Marcus had clearly touched a nerve, exposing the moral compromises that had allowed galactic civilization to function. Order! The presiding counselor's voice cut through the chaos. Sergeant Chun, are you suggesting that the Galactic Council has been negligent in its duties? Marcus paused, recognizing the trap. If he said yes, he would be directly insulting the assembled representatives of hundreds of species. If he said no, he would be undermining his own argument. I'm suggesting that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, he replied carefully, and that choosing the easy path often makes the hard choice inevitable later. Queen Lyralii stood again, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to configurations that Marcus recognized as formal support. If I may expand on Sergeant Chin's observation, the Council's reluctance to confront the Vorthack Collective directly led to their believing they could attack any target with impunity. The attack on Zirian Prime was not an aberration. It was a logical result of unchecked aggression. Your Majesty raises an interesting point, acknowledged the presiding counselor. But it does not address the concern that human intervention could lead to increased galactic instability. Admiral Morrison returned to her feet. Counselor, with respect, your galaxy was already unstable. You just didn't want to admit it. The Vorthacks were expanding. Your containment strategy was failing. Something was going to break eventually. And now it has, added Counselor Zekthite coldly. The collective has issued formal declarations of war against both Earth and Zephyr Prime. They are mobilizing invasion fleets to attack both systems simultaneously. Congratulations on your moral victory. I hope it provides comfort when your worlds burn. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. He had known that Earth would face retaliation for its intervention, but the scale of the Vorthack response was larger than anyone had anticipated. When Queen Lyralii asked, her patterns shifting to urgent concern. Intelligence estimates 18 months for full mobilization, General TYX Cole replied. Perhaps 24 if they encounter logistical difficulties. And the Council's response to this development? Admiral Morrison inquired with deceptive calm. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any verbal answer could have been. The galactic powers were going to let Earth and Zephyr Prime face the consequences of their actions alone. I see, the Admiral said quietly. We protect your ally, and you abandon us both when retaliation comes. The Council cannot risk full-scale war with the collective, the presiding counselor explained with obvious discomfort. The casualties would be catastrophic across multiple sectors. Marcus understood the logic, but he also understood the ultimate futility of it. The Vorthacks wouldn't stop with Earth and Zephyr Prime. They would be emboldened by the Council's passivity, just as they had been emboldened by previous inaction. Then, we'll face them alone, Queen Lyralii declared. Zephyr Prime stands with Earth. Your Majesty, General TYX Cole said carefully, the combined forces of two-star systems cannot hope to defeat a full collective invasion fleet. Maybe not, Marcus admitted, but we can make them pay a price they'll remember. Admiral Morrison smiled grimly. Humanity has faced extinction before, counselors. We're still here. Apparently, we're stubborn that way. This is madness, Ambassador Vextorian protested. You cannot seriously intend to fight a war you cannot win. We don't fight wars to win them, Marcus replied. We fight them because they need to be fought. The assembly erupted again, but this time Marcus noticed something different in the chaos. Several smaller delegations were looking thoughtful rather than alarmed. Species that had been silent throughout the proceedings were beginning to whisper among themselves. "If I may," called a voice from the gallery. The speaker was a being Marcus didn't recognize, tall and ethereal with features that seemed to shift between solid and energy. The Nexary Collective would like to address this assembly. The presiding counselor looked surprised. The Nexary have observer status only. This body does not traditionally. We formally request full membership consideration. The being continued. And we wish to announce our alliance with Earth and Zephyr Prime in the coming conflict. More voices rose from the gallery. Minor species that Marcus had barely heard of were declaring their support for the Human-Zephyrian Alliance. The moral arguments that had seemed to fall on deaf ears among the major powers were resonating with civilizations that had first-hand experience with Vorthack aggression. "This is unprecedented," the presiding counselor sputtered. "So was letting genocidal aggressors expand unchecked for 50 years, replied the Nexary representative. "Perhaps it is time for some precedent setting." As the session dissolved into chaos, Marcus found himself thinking about the archive chamber again. Sometimes the right choice was the hardest choice. Sometimes standing up to overwhelming odds was the only way to maintain the principles that made life worth living. Earth and its allies would face the Vorthack Collective with inferior numbers and limited resources. But they would face them as free beings fighting for something they believed in, rather than subjects hoping their compliance would earn them merciful treatment. Marcus had learned something important during his time on Zirian Prime. The galaxy wasn't divided between humans and aliens. It was divided between those who would fight for their principles and those who would abandon them for temporary safety. The coming war would determine which philosophy shaped the future of galactic civilization 14 months after the Galactic Council session. Marcus Chin stood on the command bridge of the TS Defiance, watching the final preparations for humanity's last stand. Through the reinforced viewports, he could see the combined fleet of Earth and its allies spreading across the outer edge of the Sol system like a steel constellation against the black of space. It wasn't nearly enough. The Vorthack Collective had kept their promise. Long-range sensors detected their invasion fleet approaching from 3 vectors simultaneously, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm any possible defense. Conservative estimates put their force strength at over 8,000 ships, ranging from fast attack craft to massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets. The Human-Zephyrian Alliance could muster barely 300 ships, even counting the vessels contributed by the minor species that had joined their cause. It was David versus Goliath, if David had been outnumbered by several thousand Goliaths. Final count from the outer perimeter, Admiral Morrison asked from the command chair. 733 Allied vessels in position, reported Commander Zhang, the tactical officer. The Nexary have provided quantum coordination matrices for our smaller ships. The Methani brought their gravity well generators. The Zephyrians have deployed their crystalline shield platforms at strategic intervals. Marcus nodded approvingly. In the months since the council session, the Alliance had grown from 2-star systems to nearly 40 species, most of them minor civilizations that had suffered under Vorthack expansion. They lacked the advanced technology of the major galactic powers, but they had something more valuable, the absolute determination that came from having nothing left to lose. "Any word from the council?" Admiral Morrison asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Negative, ma'am. They've withdrawn their forces to defensive positions around their home systems. Official position is that they're maintaining strict neutrality in this conflict." Marcus suppressed a bitter laugh. Neutrality. As if there could be neutrality when one side sought the complete assimilation or destruction of the other. The major galactic powers had convinced themselves that if they stayed out of the fight, the Vorthacks would leave them alone once Earth and its allies were eliminated. They were probably right, at least in the short term. The collective would need time to digest their new conquests before moving on to larger prey. But eventually they would move on. The great powers were simply buying time with other people's lives. "Sir," Communications Officer Kim announced, We're receiving a priority transmission from Queen Lyralii aboard the ZRS Redemption. Put her through. The main view screen shimmered and resolved into the image of the Zephyrian Queen. She looked older than she had during the archive chamber battle, the weight of leadership evident in her posture. But her bioluminescent patterns displayed the steady confidence that had made her such an effective wartime leader. "Admiral Morrison, Sergeant Chun," she said formally. "Our scouts confirm the collective fleet will reach firing range in approximately 6 hours. Their formation suggests they intend to engage our outer defense line immediately rather than attempt orbital bombardment. They want to eliminate our fleet capability before moving on the planets," Admiral Morrison observed. "Smart. Standard collective doctrine. There is something else," the Queen continued. "My intelligence operatives have intercepted collective communications. They are not merely seeking to conquer our systems. They intend to make an example of us. Complete biological harvesting of both Earth and Zephyr Prime. No survivors, no assimilation, just consumption." Marcus felt the bridge crew absorb this information. They had all known the stakes were high, but there was something about hearing it stated so clinically that drove home the absolute nature of their situation. "Then, we make sure they pay such a high price that the example they set is not the one they intended," Admiral Morrison replied calmly. Marcus admired her composure, but he could see the strain in her eyes. She had spent the past year transforming Earth's defensive forces from a planetary protection fleet into something capable of deep space operations. It had been an impressive achievement, but impossible odds remained impossible regardless of how well you prepared for them. "Marcus," Queen Lyralii addressed him directly, "I have a specific request. The collective will undoubtedly attempt to capture command vessels for intelligence harvesting. If the Redemption becomes compromised, I would consider it an honor if you would ensure that classified information does not fall into their hands." It was a polite way of asking him to kill her if capture became inevitable. Marcus nodded solemnly. "Understood, Your Majesty. But let's focus on making sure it doesn't come to that." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Everyone present understood that they were likely living through the final hours of human independence. The best-case scenario involved a fighting withdrawal that might delay collective victory by a few months. The worst-case scenario was complete annihilation within the next 24 hours. "Sir," Sensor Operator Thompson called out, "long-range detection is picking up preliminary Vorthack formations. They're dropping out of hyperspace at the system edge." "Show me." The tactical display lit up with red contacts appearing along the outer boundary of the Sol system. The Vorthack fleet was massive beyond anything Marcus had ever imagined. Wave after wave of enemy vessels materialized from hyperspace, spreading across the approaches to Earth like a malignant cloud. "My God," someone whispered. The enemy formations were beautiful in their terrible precision. Massive dreadnoughts anchored fleet groups that included hundreds of supporting vessels. Fast attack squadrons moved in complex patterns around the main battle formations. Specialized support craft hung back in defensive positions, clearly prepared for an extended campaign. "They're not just here to conquer us," Admiral Morrison observed quietly. "They're here to demonstrate their power to the rest of the galaxy. This is as much about intimidating future resistance as it is about eliminating current threats." Marcus studied the tactical display with professional interest. The collective had committed more resources to this operation than military necessity required. They were making a statement, showing the galactic community what happened to species that chose resistance over submission. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," came the announcement over the fleet communication system. "The enemy has arrived in force. In approximately 5 hours, we will engage in what may be the most important battle in the history of our species. Not because victory will ensure our survival, but because how we fight will determine how we are remembered." Marcus felt the Admiral's words resonate through the ship. Around him, the bridge crew sat straighter, their fear transforming into grim determination. "We are not here to win an impossible battle," the Admiral continued. We are here to prove that some principles are worth dying for. We are here to show the galaxy that freedom is not something to be bartered away for temporary safety. We are here to demonstrate that the human spirit cannot be conquered, even when human worlds can be. The communication system crackled with responses from across the Allied fleet. Ships from dozens of species acknowledged the message in their own languages, but the sentiment was universal. They would stand together. They would fight together. And, if necessary, they would die together. Marcus, Admiral Morrison said quietly, I want you to know that your actions on Zirian Prime started something that will outlive all of us. Whatever happens today, the galaxy will remember that someone stood up when it mattered. Marcus nodded, thinking about the chain of events that had led from a single human soldier defending an alien queen to this massive fleet preparing for humanity's last battle. Sometimes history pivoted on the smallest decisions made by the most unlikely people. Admiral, Commander Zhang reported, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the outer system. Some of our deep space monitoring stations are detecting additional hyperspace signatures. More vortex? Unknown, ma'am. The signatures don't match collective ship profiles. Marcus felt a flutter of hope despite himself. Reinforcements seemed impossible, but the universe had surprised him before. The tactical display updated as new contacts resolved from hyperspace. These ships were different from the Vorthack formations. Larger, more heavily armed, and moving with the kind of precision that suggested advanced tactical coordination systems. Identification confirmed, Communications Officer Kim announced, her voice tight with disbelief. Defense Alliance Fleet Group Delta 7, commanded by General TYX Cole. They're requesting permission to join the defensive formation. The bridge erupted in surprised conversation before Admiral Morrison restored order with a sharp gesture. Confirm that identification, and find out what changed their minds. General TYX Cole's reptilian features appeared on the main screen, his expression grim but resolute. Admiral Morrison, I bring greetings from 47 member species of the Defense Alliance. We have reconsidered our previous position regarding this conflict. General, I have to ask why you're here. Last I heard, the Council had voted for strict neutrality. The Council did vote for neutrality, the General acknowledged. However, several Alliance members have concluded that neutrality in the face of genocide is indistinguishable from complicity. We are here as volunteers, not as official representatives of our governments. More hyperspace signatures appeared on the sensors. Trade Federation vessels, hegemony battle groups, even some ships from species that Marcus didn't recognize. The impossible was happening. The galactic community was choosing sides. How many? Admiral Morrison asked. Current count is 3,700 vessels and climbing, General T.Y. Cole replied. It appears that your example has been more influential than our politicians anticipated. Marcus watched the tactical display transform from a hopeless last stand into something approaching an even fight. The Vorthack Collective still had numerical advantages, but they no longer possessed the overwhelming superiority that had made victory inevitable. General, Admiral Morrison said carefully, I have to ask about the political implications of this decision. Your governments will adapt to the new reality. The general cut her off. Marcus Chun stood alone in an archive chamber against impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. Today, we stand with him for the same reason. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. His defense of Queen Lyralii had been a small, personal decision made in the heat of combat. He had never intended to start a galactic war or inspire an interstellar alliance. But sometimes the most important moments in history began with someone simply doing their job. All ships, all fleets, Admiral Morrison announced across the expanded communication network. This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Earth ship Defiance. Today we fight not as humans or Zephyrians or any single species. Today we fight as free beings standing against tyranny. Today we show the galaxy that some principles are worth defending regardless of the cost. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of voices in dozens of languages confirmed their readiness for battle. The combined fleet began moving into attack formations, alien technologies integrating in ways that military theorists had claimed were impossible. Marcus thought about the Vorthack harvester he had faced in the archive chamber, with its clinical certainty that resistance was futile. The creature had been wrong about human nature, and by extension, it had been wrong about the nature of sentient life throughout the galaxy. Freedom wasn't a human concept. It was a universal one. The willingness to fight for principles rather than mere survival wasn't limited to Earth. It was dormant in every species, waiting for the right moment, the right example, the right cause to awaken it. Enemy fleet is accelerating toward engagement range, Sensor Operator Thompson reported. Time to contact, 4 hours, 37 minutes. Marcus checked his personal weapons one final time. The battle for humanity's survival was about to begin, but it was no longer humanity fighting alone. The galaxy had chosen its side. Now they would all discover whether courage and principle could triumph over overwhelming force and cold calculation. The answer would determine not just the fate of Earth and its allies, but the future direction of galactic civilization. Itzel, the Battle of Sol System, began exactly as Admiral Morrison had predicted. The Vorthack Collective, confident in their numerical superiority and proven tactics, advanced in perfect formation toward the combined Allied fleet. Their ships moved with the mechanical precision of a hive mind, each vessel positioned to provide maximum mutual support while presenting minimal vulnerability to enemy fire. Marcus watched from the command bridge of the Defiance as the first energy exchanges lit up the darkness between the opposing forces. The scale was unlike anything in recorded history. Thousands of ships engage simultaneously across a front spanning millions of cubic kilometers of space. Enemy lead elements are testing our outer perimeter, Commander Zhang reported. Zephyrian crystal platforms are holding, but they're taking heavy punishment. The opening phase favored the collective as expected. Their superior numbers allowed them to concentrate fire on specific defensive positions while maintaining formation integrity. But something was different about their attack patterns. The usual Vorthack coordination seemed less perfect than historical records indicated. Sir, Communications Officer Kim announced, we're receiving tactical data from Allied intelligence assets. The collective fleet is experiencing coordination difficulties. Admiral Morrison leaned forward with interest. What kind of difficulties? Response delays between fleet elements. Some ships are maneuvering out of optimal position. It's subtle, but our Nexary allies are detecting temporal desynchronization in their hive mind communications. Marcus felt a spark of hope. The Vorthack Collective's greatest strength was their perfect coordination, derived from shared consciousness across their entire species. If that coordination was compromised, their numerical advantages became much less decisive. What's causing the disruption? The Admiral asked. Unknown, ma'am. But General TYX Cole is requesting permission to exploit the weakness with a concentrated assault on their command cluster. Granted. All Allied forces execute Plan Delta. Target their coordination nodes. The battle shifted as Allied ships abandoned defensive positions and launched coordinated strikes against specific Vorthack formations. Human kinetic weapons, Zephyrian energy beams, Nexary, quantum disruptors, and dozens of other technologies combined in devastating barges that focused on enemy command vessels. The collective response was immediate but disjointed. Instead of the usual seamless adaptation to changing tactics, different fleet elements reacted with varying strategies. Some formations withdrew to regroup. Others pressed forward aggressively. A few seemed to freeze entirely, as if waiting for instructions that never came. Direct hit on enemy Harvester-class command ship, reported Weapons Officer Martinez with satisfaction. She's breaking up. Marcus watched the tactical display as the massive Vorthack vessel disintegrated under concentrated Allied fire. But something was wrong with the explosion pattern. Instead of the usual contained detonation, the ship seemed to be tearing itself apart from within. Sir, Sensor Operator Thompson called out urgently. I'm reading massive internal explosions throughout the collective fleet. Not battle damage. Something else. The view screen switched to telescopic view, showing enemy ships in various stages of internal destruction. Explosions bloomed from within armored hulls. Entire sections of massive dreadnoughts simply separated and drifted away from their parent vessels. What the hell is happening over there? Admiral Morrison demanded. Her question was answered by an incoming transmission from Queen Lyralii. The Zephyrian Queen appeared on screen, her bioluminescent patterns displaying what Marcus had learned to recognize as fierce satisfaction. Admiral Morrison, she said formally, I must inform you that certain contingency plans have been activated. 18 months ago, my intelligence services identified vulnerabilities in Vorthack communication networks. We have been preparing for this moment. Marcus stared at the Queen with new understanding. The coordination disruption wasn't an accident or battlefield interference. It was sabotage, planned and executed by Zephyrian intelligence operatives who had infiltrated the collective's hive mind network. Your Majesty, Admiral Morrison said carefully, are you telling me that your people have been conducting cyber warfare against a hive mind species? Not cyber warfare, Admiral. Psychological warfare. The Vorthack Collective believes their shared consciousness makes them invulnerable to individual dissent. They were incorrect. On the tactical display, more collective ships began experiencing internal failures. But these weren't mechanical breakdowns. Individual Vorthack crew members were turning against their own vessels, sabotaging critical systems, attacking their fellows. The hive mind was fracturing. Ow! Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The archive chamber contained more than historical records, Queen Lyralii replied. It held psychological profiles of every species the collective had assimilated over the past 2 centuries, including detailed analysis of how individual consciousness could be preserved within a hive mind structure. Marcus understood now. The Zephyrians had used captured collective knowledge against the collective itself. They had found ways to awaken individual consciousness within the hive mind, creating internal conflicts that were literally tearing the enemy fleet apart. The individuals within their collective consciousness are remembering who they were before assimilation, the Queen continued. They're choosing to resist rather than participate in the destruction of other species. The battle was transforming before their eyes. What had begun as a massive fleet engagement was becoming a collective civil war played out across thousands of ships. Former Vorthack vessels were turning their weapons on their own fleet mates. Command structures were collapsing as individual consciousness reasserted itself over hive mind programming. All Allied forces, Admiral Morrison announced, new tactical priority. Provide support to any collective vessels showing signs of internal resistance. Repeat, some enemy ships are now friendly forces. It was the most bizarre order Marcus had ever heard, but it made perfect sense in context. The Zephyrian psychological attack had turned the collective's greatest strength into a critical weakness. The shared consciousness that enabled perfect coordination also provided a pathway for the liberation of assimilated individuals. Sir, Commander Jean reported, we're receiving surrender signals from multiple collective formations. They're requesting asylum and protection from their own forces. The tide had turned completely. Within hours, what should have been humanity's last stand became the largest mass liberation in galactic history. Thousands of individuals from dozens of species, freed from Vorthack control, were attempting to reclaim their ships and their lives. But the core collective forces weren't finished. The most heavily indoctrinated elements of their fleet, those who had been assimilated generations ago, maintained their hive mind conditioning. These ships pressed their attack with desperate fury, targeting both Allied vessels and their own liberated brethren with equal hatred. Enemy core formation is attempting to withdraw to hyperspace, Sensor Operator Thompson announced. They're abandoning the engagement. Don't let them escape, Admiral Morrison ordered. If they reach other collective territories, they'll adapt to our tactics and develop countermeasures. The Allied fleet pursued the retreating Vortex across the outer system, a running battle that lasted for 6 hours. Ship after ship from the core collective was hunted down and destroyed or captured. The few vessels that managed to escape did so as individual ships rather than coordinated formations. When the last enemy signature vanished from sensors, Marcus found himself standing on the bridge of a victorious fleet that had achieved the impossible. Humanity had not merely survived the collective assault. They had liberated thousands of enslaved individuals and effectively ended the Vortex threat to galactic civilization. Final casualty reports? Admiral Morrison asked quietly. Allied losses: 437 vessels, approximately 50,000 personnel, Commander Jean replied. Collective losses: complete destruction of organized fleet structure, liberation of an estimated 2 million individuals, capture or destruction of over 6,000 vessels. Marcus absorbed the numbers. They had lost friends, allies, brave individuals who had chosen to fight for principle rather than submit to tyranny. But their sacrifice had achieved something unprecedented: the end of galactic civilization's most persistent threat. "Sir," Communications Officer Kim announced, "we're receiving congratulatory messages from across the galaxy. The Defense Alliance is formally requesting a full military alliance with Earth and Zephyr Prime. The Trade Federation wants to discuss technology sharing agreements. Even the Galactic Council is asking for a formal audience with our leadership." Admiral Morrison smiled grimly. Funny how quickly neutrality disappears when the shooting stops. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with one human soldier refusing to abandon his post in an alien archive chamber. That single decision had created ripples that eventually reshaped the entire galaxy's approach to freedom and resistance. "Your Majesty," Admiral Morrison addressed Queen Lyreliai's image on the main screen, "I believe our alliance has proven rather effective. I hope Zephyr Prime will consider making it permanent." "Admiral Morrison, Marcus Chun, brave allies," the Queen replied, her bioluminescent patterns displaying deep satisfaction. "The Zephyrian Empire would be honored to stand with Earth in facing whatever challenges the future may bring." Over the following weeks, as refugee ships from across the galaxy arrived at Earth, and Zephyr Prime carrying liberated individuals seeking new homes, Marcus reflected on the lessons of the conflict. The Vortex Collective had possessed superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and centuries of successful conquest. But they had failed to understand something fundamental about sentient life. Freedom wasn't just a political concept or a military objective. It was a basic requirement for consciousness itself. Every individual, regardless of species, possessed an innate drive towards self-determination that could be suppressed, but never truly eliminated. The collective had built their empire on the assumption that resistance could be overcome through sufficient force and proper conditioning. They had been wrong. Resistance wasn't a tactical problem to be solved. It was an essential characteristic of life itself. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the Defiance, watching Earth grow larger as the fleet returned home. The planet looked exactly the same as it had when they left, but everything else had changed. Humanity was no longer an isolated species struggling to understand its place in galactic civilization. Earth was now the center of an alliance that spanned dozens of star systems and hundreds of species. More importantly, it had become a symbol of something that the galaxy had almost forgotten: the idea that some principles were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. A year later, Marcus found himself back on Zirian Prime, standing in the rebuilt archive chamber where everything had begun. The room looked much the same as it had before the battle, though the walls now displayed memorials to those who had fallen defending the palace. Queen Lyreliai entered the chamber, her posture regal, but relaxed in a way that suggested the burdens of wartime leadership had finally lifted. Her bioluminescent patterns displayed the contentment that came from duty fulfilled and honor preserved. "Marcus Chun," she said formally, "I wanted to personally thank you for teaching my species something we had forgotten. "What's that, Your Majesty?" That courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of fear. When my guards abandoned their posts, they were afraid. When you stood your ground, you were afraid too. The difference was in how you chose to respond to that fear. Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper truth of her words. The galaxy had spent centuries developing increasingly complex strategies for avoiding confrontation with existential threats. But in the end, the solution had been elegantly simple. Someone had to be willing to stand up and fight. The galaxy is changing, Your Majesty. Species that had never spoken to each other are forming alliances. Technologies are being shared across traditional boundaries. Even the major powers are reconsidering their approaches to collective security. Yes, she agreed. Fear had made us smaller than we needed to be. Courage has reminded us how large we can become when we work together. As Marcus prepared to leave Zirian Prime and return to Earth, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He had volunteered for a cultural exchange program, hoping to learn about alien civilizations. Instead, he had helped reshape galactic civilization itself. The universe was a vast and often dangerous place, filled with threats that could destroy entire worlds. But it was also filled with beings capable of standing up to those threats when circumstances demanded it. The key was recognizing when those moments arrived and having the courage to act accordingly. Standing in the rebuilt archive chamber, surrounded by the knowledge and wisdom of countless civilizations, Marcus understood that his story was really just beginning. The galaxy was full of injustices that needed fighting, problems that needed solving, and principles that needed defending. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, there were probably other soldiers standing guard in impossible situations, making the same choice between safety and principle that he had made in this very room. The thought gave him comfort. As long as there were beings willing to stand up when it mattered, the galaxy would remain free. And that, Marcus realized, was the most important lesson of all.